What's going on YouTube? Johnny Mac here. Today I'm going to be presenting you my Moebius curse build that I have lovingly dubbed the Cursed Priestess. At least I think she's a priestess. She might be a nun. But seriously, I don't exactly know what she is. But regardless, she slaps. But before we get into it, let me get my little shameless plug here. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to be notified when I make future uploads of videos just like this one. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get on into the build. Let's see a little clip of her in action. The first thing that we're going to go over is my skill tree. We're going to hit this first because there's a particular change that I've made to my skill tree that I didn't do in previous builds, and that is because it feeds directly into my augment tree, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. So as you see here, I'm going to highlight shield prime. I spec 2 points into shield prime because when your shield is primed, it will reflect 50% of incoming damage back to the enemy. Now I'm old school, so in any time that you don't have to do anything extra, or any time that you can do something simultaneously to increase your damage while you're doing something else, that's a huge boost in DPS. So since we're already initiating our combos with a parry, we're actually increasing our damage at the same time that we're initiating our combo. And that equals out to be a huge level of DPS efficiency. Now let's get into the meat and potatoes of the augment tree. First, let me state that this is a cursed build, so obviously we are going to be focusing on damage to cursed enemies as well as void damage. But as you get further up into the tower, you'll start getting into more and more armored enemies, so we are throwing some breach damage into the build just to make things a little bit easier in that late game. And as always, we will have a secondary focus on survivability and my personal favorite, overhealth, because if you are dead, you're not doing any damage. First up, I'm going to go over the primary 3 augments in this build. Number 1 is Surety. If you don't have a Surety yet, get one. If you don't have a Surety yet, then you can use Carnage or whatever other augment that you have to take its place. But you definitely need to get a Surety. Next up is probably one of the most important augments in the build, White Recluse. This is a very often overlooked augment simply because it doesn't seem to do a whole lot up front. However, it applies a mark of leeching whenever you blind an enemy. This is very important because every single time that you hit an enemy that is marked with leeching, it gives you health. This adds to your overall survivability, especially in the late game. And last but not least, Rift. This is a very important augment to the build as we are focusing on applying curse to enemies, which is going to help increase our overall DPS. I'll let the rest of the augments flip through so that way you can get an idea of the rest of the build. And I will make a quick note that the common theme with the rest of these augments is that we're focusing on Archon Fury charge speed and Archon Fury damage with a focus of void damage and damage to cursed enemies for our secondary stats. Now, for sake of clarity, let's go ahead and touch back on the combo for this build. Now, as I'd mentioned before, you're going to open your combo with a parry. This is important because every single time that you parry, you blind that enemy as well as any other enemies that are in close proximity. So let's take a closer look at the actual combo itself. You're going to open with a parry, and then follow up with damage. Now as you'll notice, all the enemies that were blinded now have a nice greenish mist around them, and that is the mark of leeching proc. And when you do damage to those enemies, you'll see little white orbs come back to your body, and that is the health that you gain. So let's go ahead and get into the final portion of our build, the gear. First off, in our attributes panel, you can see that we focus heavily on Spirit and Chance to Curse, which is at 31%. For our main hand, we use the Polearm Void Sight, which allows us to summon a Void Sentinel whenever you use your Northern Technique. And this is great because we use our Northern Technique quite a lot, proc Surety. For our offhand, we've got my trusty Maul of Obsidian Pack, which helps feed our overhealth, and for a primary kicker, it shoots up to 3 projectiles that each deal 3,211 void damage to an enemy when you soul shatter an enemy with your southern technique. A hammer in your offhand is an absolute necessity for this build in my opinion, as it offers the highest tier of breach and breach damage. The shielded heavies in the upper tiers of the tower take an absolute beating. For our first ring, we have the Eye of the Dragon, which whenever we defeat a cursed enemy, we gain more overhealth. For our second ring, we've got Mithra's Seal, which this allows us to gain the Blessing of Infusion whenever we defeat a marked enemy. So when an enemy is cursed and we defeat that enemy, it boosts our chance to inflict curse even further. And the last piece of gear I would like to highlight is Sunsteel's Crest. Drain the enemy strength whenever you hit a cursed enemy. Drained enemies deal less damage, and your damage is increased for 20 seconds. And the rest of the gear is pretty meta at this point. Alright everybody, so that concludes my Moebius build, and I just want to hope that everybody has some good luck with it. For those who haven't been into the higher tiers of the tower, I hope this maybe helps you out. For anybody who is looking for a good Moebius build, I hope that this is the one for you. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing, as I will continue to put out more builds just like this one. And if you are subscribed, thank you for your continued support. It has been a fantastic trip so far. It's because of you all that I continue to try to put out the highest quality content that I can. And as always, thanks for watching.